Imagine this on a 40-degree C night. The wind slicing through every door crack like a thin blade, the window glass in a modern house fogged white with moisture, and you curled up inside thick layers, hands shaking as the cold slips into every corner of the room just minutes after the heater finishes its cycle. But hundreds of years ago, in conditions even harsher, a European farming family would step out from under their blankets without a single shiver. The clay oven at the center of the house was still releasing a steady warmth long after the single firing at dawn. No machines humming, no on-off cycle, no bills, just a 2-ton block of fired earth quietly holding on to every bit of heat as if a small sun were trapped inside. The unbelievable part is that they burned wood for only about 2 hours.
It is time to eat.
And the house stayed
Come and
warm
sit.
for the next 24. Even on nights when a modern family would panic and bump the thermostat a few degrees just to stay alive. And it's that contrast. One side trembling at the first winter wind, the other living calmly in the heart of the freeze, that makes you stop and ask, how did they pull off something our modern systems still struggle to do? If you're starting to feel curious about the secrets behind this ancient thermal battery, drop a comment below, because what comes next is even more surprising. What most of us were never taught in school, and what the modern heating industry almost intentionally ignores, lies in the very material that stores heat. Because if you place a sheet of steel and a block of fired clay side by side and heat them to the same temperature, you'll notice a truth that feels almost insulting to modern engineering. Metal heats up incredibly fast, but it loses that heat so quickly that by the time you turn around to make a cup of tea, it's already cold. Steel's thermal conductivity is around 45 Wm/K, which means it's basically a bucket full of holes. No matter how much energy you pour in, it leaks out just as fast. But clay is a completely different story. Fired earth conducts heat at only about 0.32 to 0.43 Wm/K, nearly 45 times lower. When you heat a clay oven and a metal oven to the same level, the metal bleeds its warmth almost instantly, while the clay holds on to it as if it has a memory of its own. This is why a medieval oven needed just 2 hours of fire to heat a home for an entire day, while a modern house starts cooling only 20 minutes after the heater shuts off. The entire secret lies in how materials hold and release heat. And if you think this difference is just theoretical, wait for the next part, where you'll see how medieval builders turned this advantage into a heating system that was nearly impossible to defeat. What freezes most modern people in disbelief isn't that a medieval clay oven holds heat longer than metal. It's the actual scale of the energy it stores from just a single firing. When researchers recalculated the numbers, they realized the amount wasn't just large. It was so huge that it's impossible to believe unless you measure it yourself. A typical Russian pech oven weighs around 2,000 to 4,000 pounds. Basically, a small car made of nothing but brick and fired earth. It sounds primitive, but every kilogram of brick can store 800 to 1,000 joules per Kelvin. So how much heat does the whole thing swallow after a 2-hour burn? Over 700,000 joules. An insane number for something built by hand out of backyard dirt. And here comes the twist. A modern metal stove weighing 50 pounds, the thing we're told is efficient, stores almost nothing. Because the heat you put in is the same heat it dumps out and instantly loses. Which means, while you have to keep feeding yours non-stop just to keep the house from freezing, medieval families simply charged their oven once and let it run all day. The difference is so extreme that many modern engineers once claimed it was impossible until they measured it directly and watched the bricks stay warm for 14 to 16 hours. If you ever assume technology always improves with time, this is the moment the graph suddenly turns backward. And before we move on to the next part, where the story gets even more shocking, you can drop a quick comment below. What would you think if the most efficient heating system ever built belonged to people who lived 500 years ago? What most modern people never notice is that we live in houses warmed by air, the lightest, most easily escaped, most unreliable thing you could ever depend on when the weather turns cold. Your heater blasts a stream of hot air. The hot air shoots up to the ceiling, slips through cracks, and disappears within minutes, leaving you sitting in a room that's warm on top, cold on the bottom, and miserable to be in. But for medieval people, warmth didn't come from air at all. It came from the very materials around them. When a massive clay oven began to radiate heat, it didn't warm the air first. It fired invisible infrared waves across the room, a kind of warmth your skin recognizes even while cold wind is still sneaking through the door. Thick wooden walls absorbed it and became warm like the presence of a person standing beside you. The brick floor heated slowly, holding each pulse of warmth like a memory of the flame. Even blankets, wooden bowls, and bed frames stored and released heat for hours. You could stand in a room sitting at 50 degrees and still feel your body relax, your joints loosen, the air cold but you warm, a paradox only radiant heat can create. That's why medieval families said 65 degrees with a clay oven felt warmer than 70 degrees says with a modern air heater. The air may be cold, but the entire world around you quietly wraps you in a layer of invisible warmth. What amazes modern engineers isn't that medieval ovens held heat for a long time. It's the way they squeezed every last degree of warmth out of the fire before letting anything escape. In a metal stove or modern fireplace, the hot gases shoot straight up the chimney at 600 to 800 degrees, meaning most of the energy you just burned vanishes in seconds. But medieval builders thought differently. They created a twisting labyrinth inside the oven mass, called the cania, where the hot gases were forced to move sideways, then downward, before they were ever allowed to rise. Every time the heat touched the cooler clay walls, another layer of warmth was stripped off and stored in the brick like charging a battery. No straight paths, no shortcuts for the heat to escape. The result is that by the time the exhaust finally reaches the chimney, it's only 200 to 350 degrees, still enough to create draft, but proof that nearly 90% of the heat has been captured inside the oven body. What's remarkable is that medieval builders had no sensors, no thermal simulations, no CFD graphs. They relied purely on observation and generations of trial and error, and by accident created a heat recovery system that is still considered near perfect. If you think this efficiency surpasses every modern home heater, you're not wrong, and the next part will surprise you even more. There's a truth modern stove users almost never believe the first time they hear it, because it goes completely against instinct.
I think it's time
The faster
for me to go.
and hotter the fire burns, the warmer the house gets, and the longer that warmth lasts. It sounds like some ancient myth whispered across centuries, yet it's exactly the secret medieval builders discovered hundreds of years ago. When they packed 80 pounds of dry wood into a peak and burned it at temperatures that could exceed 2,000 degrees, the fire wasn't meant to be stretched out to last longer. The goal was to make it erupt as violently as possible, glowing white, almost becoming a living creature inside the oven chamber. At that heat, the wood doesn't just burn, it disappears, producing no smoke, no soot, leaving behind only pure energy pulled into the thick brick walls as if the oven were greedily swallowing every last drop of heat. And when the flames died, they did the thing modern people often forget. They sealed every draft, closing the entire fire heart they had just charged, letting it radiate in silence like a hibernating beast. The strangest part is the silence that follows. No machines, no fans pushing hot air through ducts. Just a multi-ton thermal mass releasing a slow, steady stream of heat. The calm breathing of an ancient creature living at the center of the home. The first 6 hours, it's scorching. The next 6, it's softer but still powerful. And for 12 more hours, it becomes a gentle warmth you feel in the back of a chair, the surface of a table, even in a folded blanket resting in the corner. A rhythm medieval people understood so well, they simply called it the cycle of the oven. Something we've almost forgotten today. And if you've ever felt radiant heat, you understand why they believed fire wasn't just fuel, but a soul awakened every morning. And if the idea of burn fast to stay warm longer surprises you, drop a comment below, because the next part reveals secrets even harder to believe. What shocks most modern people isn't that medieval ovens held heat for a long time, but how they were built. 3 construction secrets that sound crude, strange, and so unbelievable that today's engineers would blush. The first secret lies right under your feet. Medieval builders partially buried the oven in the ground, not for convenience, but because they discovered that winter soil is always warmer than the air. The earth became a natural coat, trapping heat and preventing cold winds from sucking warmth out of the oven mass. The second secret is the one that truly makes modern audiences flinch. They mixed dried, burned animal dung into the clay. It sounds dirty, but the twist is this. During the first firing, all the organic material burns away, leaving behind countless tiny air pockets. Those air pockets act as a perfect insulation layer, the kind modern engineers have tried to replicate for decades, but still can't copy exactly. The oven walls become lighter, more flexible, less prone to cracking, and most importantly, able to hold heat for an absurd amount of time. The final secret is wall thickness. Medieval builders didn't choose at random. They spent generations testing, failing, and refining until they found the golden point, 3 to 6 inches, thick enough to store heat for 24 hours, but not so thick that it takes all day to warm up. From those 3 details, tiny, crude, almost laughably simple, they created an ancient thermal machine we still haven't surpassed today. The cruel irony of our era is this. The more we pay for comfort, the easier it is for the cold to defeat us. Imagine a blizzard knocking out power across an entire neighborhood. In a modern home worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, with a $3,000 a season heating system, the gas furnace falls silent. The fans stop. The thermostat becomes useless. The room starts cooling by the minute, and you suddenly realize how completely your life depends on a single, fragile electrical line. But just a few centuries ago, inside the tiny wooden home of a poor medieval family, no electricity, no machines, no modern devices, they still sat at the dinner table wrapped in the steady warmth radiating from a clay oven charged that morning. There was nothing to shut off, so there was nothing to fail. They were free in the most literal sense, free from monthly bills, free from fuel monopolies, free from the fear of what happens if the power goes out. The moment you place those 2 images side by side, one being expensive, fragile comfort, the other being poor, resilient, self-sufficient technology, You can clearly see the injustice no one has ever bothered to name. What leaves most viewers stunned isn't that medieval clay ovens were more efficient than modern systems. It's the real reason this technology disappeared. We were taught that clay ovens were abandoned because they were bulky, primitive, no longer suited for the times. But when historians and engineers began cross-checking the data, an uncomfortable truth emerged. Clay ovens didn't die because they were outdated. They were killed because they were too perfect. A 2-ton earthen oven could run beautifully for 80 to 120 years, needing almost no maintenance, no replacement parts, no gas, no electricity, no scheduled servicing. It was a nightmare for any business model built on dependency.
Is it dry yet?
Modern metal
Almost.
stoves and forced
Just a
air
little
systems are the opposite. A lifespan of 15 to 20
What do you think
years,
Santa's gonna bring us
constant
this year?
maintenance, constant fuel consumption,
Would you
a
like me to
steady
read you
stream
a
of
story
profit
now?
for the companies behind them. And then, in the late 19th century, when heating manufacturers began expanding their markets, a sophisticated marketing campaign appeared. They labeled clay ovens old-fashioned, unhygienic, unfit for the industrial age. New building codes, standards, and regulations made installing clay ovens nearly impossible. Banks refused to issue mortgages for homes without modern heating systems. And within just a few decades, a technology that had lasted 1,000 years vanished from the map. Not because it was inferior, but because it didn't generate revenue. There's one thing most of us never expect. The most durable, cheapest, and most efficient heating technology humans ever created didn't come from modern laboratories. It came from the small wooden homes of medieval Europe. And the final twist, the one that makes many viewers sit in silence for a few seconds, is that medieval families didn't keep a fire burning all day. They only fired the oven twice a day. In the morning, a wake-up burn to charge the multi-ton clay mass. In the evening, another burn to prepare for the long night. Each burn lasted only 1 to 3 hours, but because of the massive amount of heat stored in the bricks, the home stayed warm for a full 24 hours. No temperature swings, no blasts of hot and cold air, no machines, no bills. Just a slow, steady rhythm medieval people called the cycle of the oven, a rhythm we've sadly forgotten. When you place this beside the image of a modern family whose heater must switch on and off 40 times a day just to maintain a flimsy sense of warmth, you understand why this story lingers in people's minds. 500 years ago, with crude tools and cheap materials, they built a system that outperforms most home heating technology today. They optimized through observation, intuition, and generations of trial and error. No electronics needed. And we, living in the age of comfort, are paying for that forgotten wisdom with money, with dependence, and with those unexpected cold nights when modern systems fail. If this lesson feels worth thinking about, drop a comment below. Do you choose dependent comfort or independent warmth? And if you want to keep exploring medieval technologies that outclass the modern world, don't forget to subscribe, because the next secrets are even more shocking.